Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources Public Waters Inventory Update Project webinar. I'm so glad you could join us today. Thank you for taking the time to do so. My name is Camille Morse-Nicholson, and I'm the Division Planner with the Minnesota DNR's Division of Ecological and Water Resources, also known as EWR. Minnesota's water resources are among the most valuable resources in our state, and the inventory of these lakes, watercourses, and wetlands that are classified as public waters has broad interest across state and local governments, among the industrial, agricultural, institutional, and commercial business sectors, and for Minnesotans as a whole. The Minnesota DNR understands and appreciates the high level of interest that folks have in the Public Waters Inventory update. And on today's webinar, we'll provide information about how the project came to be, what's included in the project, and our initial thinking on the procedure for updating the Public Waters Inventory, or the PWI, as you'll hear it referred to today. Before we get started, I do want to share a few logistics of note. The first is that if you have any questions related to WebEx, which is the service used for this webinar, please direct those to the chat, and they will go directly to the host only. And then thanks, Randall, for moving to this slide. In the image that you see on the screen right now, there are directions for how to access the question and answer function on WebEx. So at the bottom right hand of your screen, you'll see those three dots lined up horizontally, an ellipsis. And if you click those and select Q&A, you'll be able to submit any of the questions that you might have for today's speakers. After today's presentation, there will be a dedicated time for question and answers, as you may have assumed, but we may run short on time before we can answer them all. So to ensure that you have the information that you've come here to get and what you're looking for, we will be recording this session, and our wonderful host has already begun that recording. And we will also provide a write-up with responses to any questions that we can't get to in the time allotted today. Those responses will be posted on our Public Waters Inventory webpage and sent out using our Public Waters Inventory email updates. You may have gotten notice about today's webinar from that Gov delivery list newsletter, but if you haven't had an opportunity to sign up for this email distribution list, you can do so at mndnr.gov/pwi-update. All announcements related to the project will be sent out to the individuals who've signed up for those email updates. And now I would like to introduce our presenters today, Melissa Koski, EWR's Deputy Director, and Randall Deneen, the Conservation Assistance and Regulation Section Manager, both who are within the Ecological and Water Resources Division of the Minnesota DNR. Thanks, Melissa. I'll hand it off to you now.
Thank you, Camille. Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to discuss, you can see the agenda there on the slide. We'll discuss some recent revisions to the Public Water Statute. Then we'll give a fairly robust explanation of what public waters are. Then we'll describe the Public Waters Inventory, or PWI, and give a high-level outline of what we currently know of our process for making updates to it. Finally, we'll provide time for questions and answers. Before I turn it over to Randall, there are a couple of key points that I want to make sure everyone understands. First and foremost is to make clear that the 2024 statute changes did not change the definition of what a public water is. So our update effort should not be considered any sort of broad overhaul or change to the PWI as a whole. Any revisions to the PWI that we make will be to correct errors in the current inventory. Randall will cover this in a bit more detail, but this has been a common question, so I wanted to address it right away. I also want to emphasize a point that Camille provided in the welcome. This project is a very big undertaking, and it's very important to most Minnesotans. That reality is guiding our development of the process that we intend to use for implementing the update. In this webinar, we'll be providing an outline and components of the process, but we've not yet finalized that process. We do know for certain, though, that robust public engagement and opportunities for input by landowners, local governments, and all Minnesotans will be an integral part of the process. With that, I'll turn it over to Randall to provide some more details.
Thank you, Melissa. First topic that I'd like to discuss is the 2024 legislation. As was mentioned, the statute revision did not make any changes to the definition of public water. Rather, it clarifies that public waters are not determined by the PWI. Essentially, this revision clarifies that the statutory definition of public waters is the controlling statute, not the water body's presence or absence on the public waters inventory. This clarification was a result of a Minnesota Supreme Court decision that found a specific watercourse was a public water, but the court did not rule on the larger question of how the public waters inventory relates to the statutory definition of public water. On this question, the court deferred to the legislative process to clarify the relationship. So there you have it. The statutory definition, which was not changed, is the controlling statute for determining whether a water body is a public water. This, however, created some concern about this clarification because the public waters inventory is such an important tool for the DNR, for local governments, landowners, and others to easily identify a public water. The importance of this tool is so great that it was determined that it should be as accurate as possible. With that in mind, a session law was passed that directed DNR to update the public waters inventory and provided funding for the project. Here we have the statutory definitions of this control, which are public waters within the state. Public waters can either be basins, which are essentially lakes, watercourses, either rivers or streams, or wetlands are the three main classifications of public water. As you can see, there's 11 different characteristics that can make something a public water. Items number 1 through 8 are related to basins. These are the 10,000 lakes of Minnesota. I'm going to briefly walk through these definitions for you. First off, any basin that has a shoreline management classification that has been classified by the commissioner under the Shoreline Management Act is a public water. Then number 2, if a court makes a determination that a specific water is public, then it becomes a public water. Number 3, meandered lakes are public waters. Number 4, if a basin has been designated by the commissioner for a specific management purpose, such as a trout lake or a wildlife lake, then that basin is a public water. If a basin is located within, or the basin is a scientific and natural area, it will be a public water. If a basin is totally surrounded by public lands, it's a public water. Number 7, if there's federal or state ownership of the beds or the shorelines, it is typically public water. And lastly, for basins, if it has a public access, then it is also a public water. Those are the 8 situations that create a lake as a public water. Number 9 and 10 are related to watercourses. Number 9, a watercourse has to have a drainage area of greater than 2 square miles. Or number 10, if it is designated as a trout stream. There is also a court case that determined designated trout stream tributaries are also included in that definition of a public water. There is another portion that defines watercourses in whole as having definable bed and banks. So that is tied into the size limit of the drainage area and the trout streams. So they do have to have a definable bed and bank to meet that definition. There is a fair amount of confusion on how we go about measuring the 2 square mile drainage area of a watercourse. So I want to briefly walk through that with you now. So for this demonstration, we're going to make the simplification that we understand that each one of these water courses is a tributary to the next. We have 3 different water courses. We know this one from the north flows into this one on the west. It flows into this one on the east. When you measure the total drainage area, you measure from the point where the water course is in the confluence to the next largest stream. As you can see here in this picture, it's showing the drainage area of that small water course in the north. This has a drainage area of 1.2 square miles. So this water course is not a public water. If we go to this next larger one that it flows into, again, measuring from the confluence to the next largest water course, it has a drainage area of 5.7 miles. This is a public water course. Now I want to turn to the last point of the definition of public water, and that is wetlands. Wetlands, to be a public water wetland, it has to be type 3, 4, or 5. And there's a minimum size limit that it needs to be a public water. In unincorporated areas, it has to be 10 acres or larger to be a public water. In incorporated areas, essentially within cities, incorporated towns, size limit is 2.5 acres. Now I want to just walk a little through kind of what these wetlands look like on the landscape. Type 3 wetlands are shallow marshes with soil usually waterlogged in the spring and often covered with 6 or more inches of water. Type 4 wetlands are deep marshes with soil usually covered in water in the spring and summer with water depths anywhere between 6 inches and 3 feet. Type 5 wetlands are open water wetlands such as shallow ponds with water depths less than 6 feet and fringed by emergent vegetation. So there you have it. These are the definitions of what determines whether a lake, watercourse, or wetland is a public water. It seems relatively straightforward on paper, but translating these definitions to complex ecological systems on the landscape is not so straightforward. I'm now going to turn it back over to Melissa to dive a little deeper into public waters.
Thanks, Randall. So Randall's kind of given you that statutory definition, and now we'll just kind of jump into a few examples that demonstrate the spectrum of public waters as we see them on our landscape in Minnesota. And then I'll describe some of the important public values that these waters have. First, just some examples of public water basins. Remember, these are the lakes and ponds that Randall talked about. Public water basins can come in all sizes, and there's no minimum size requirement in statute. So that means even small ponds that could also otherwise be classified as a type 5 wetland, which Randall just mentioned are those open water wetlands. Even a small pond may end up being a public water basin because it's a meandered lake or it aligns with some other criteria that Randall identified in the public water basin statutory definition. So here we have a large public water basin that may be familiar to many of you, that is Lake Superior. We also have a medium public water basin. I think this is Vadnais Lake. And finally, we have a rather small basin. Some of you may call it a pond. So those are, just some of the different size basins that we see across the state. Now, public water courses, remember those are the streams and rivers. Those also come in all shapes and sizes. We have this with the smallest being those trout stream tributaries with the definable bed and bank. But here you see the mighty Mississippi as one of our large water courses. We also can see medium-sized water courses all across the state. And finally, a small water course that is running through a field, essentially. So we've gone through some definitions and examples of public water, and I want to take a moment to just talk about what it is about these waters that makes them so important to the public. It's state policy that public water resources are managed in the best interest of Minnesotans. So maintaining these waters to provide ecological, recreational, and societal services is in the best public interest. Ecological services include providing habitat and food for a diverse mix of organisms. This includes fish, invertebrates, plants, birds, amphibians, reptiles, mammals. Now, these are complex ecological systems, and the need to protect these systems is acknowledged in Minnesota law by requiring avoidance and minimization of impacts to these systems and the public waters that host them. The law is specific in identifying that this avoidance particularly consider the ecology of the water body. Additionally, wetlands help improve water quality and store water and recharge aquifers. And basins, wetlands, and watercourses all influence the extent and conditions of other water resources, including groundwater and downstream surface waters. Recreational services include swimming, boating, fishing, and hunting. The aesthetics of these water bodies and the ecosystems they support are also important for hiking and nature viewing. Societal services include flood retention, water supply, transportation, cooling, and wastewater treatment. All of these services are important to Minnesotans, and that's recognized by the protections that accompany the public water designation, including the permitting requirements that address and regulate potential impacts to these waters, as well as Minnesota's buffer law, originally passed in 2015, that requires vegetative buffers along public waters. So by now you're probably wondering, how will this update to the inventory affect these water resources, and what exactly are you planning to do? Well, as was stated earlier, the inventory is an important tool to identify the presence of a public water so that everyone understands the protections that are afforded to these resources. I'm going to turn it back to Randall, and he'll talk a little bit about both the history of the PWI, and then he'll provide an outline of how we're planning to proceed with our update.
Thank you, Melissa. Before I get into the details of the update project, I do want to talk a little bit about the public water inventory and what it is. Prior to the original inventory, the only way to identify a public water was to compare that specific water body to the statutory definition. This created confusion, disagreement, and a lack of common understanding. To address this issue, in 1979, the DNR was directed to prepare a map and list of public water basins, wetlands, and watercourses for each county. The law identified the process that was to be used, and by the mid-1980s, the PWI was finalized. This resulted in what is the historic PWI map and list, and those are depicted on the screen for you now. This was a huge effort in the 1980s, and it created a durable and reliable inventory that is still used today. This historic effort has since been converted to digital data that can be displayed and analyzed using Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. Any updates will be included in this public waters data set. The DNR will also publish maps of the updated inventory so that non-GIS users have access to this information. Now let's turn to the update project itself. And again, to reiterate, we have not finalized the process that will be used as part of this update, but we have finalized many important components that we will share with you today. The first thing we're doing is hiring a team of hydrologists to conduct the update. We have 5 hydrologists that we'll be hiring. We have 1 lead worker and then 4 staff hydrologists that will work that lead worker to complete the update process. We'll be proceeding county by county with the goal of getting an average of 12 counties completed a year. We'll obviously adjust that based on sizes of counties, complexity, number of waters that are present. And we will also likely be working in more than one county at any one time. Before the team begins working in any specific county, we will provide public notice and an opportunity to identify potential corrections that the team should evaluate. We want to do this so when we begin the work, we have the whole set of potential corrections in front of the team for their analysis. Once we have that information, the team will analyze the potential corrections using desktop tools such as LiDAR data and aerial photography. In some instances, field visits and verification may be necessary. After the team has conducted their analysis of all these potential corrections, they will create a map of preliminary corrections. This information will be made public for review and comment. The notice of the preliminary corrections will be given to local governments, landowners that are subject to preliminary corrections, other state agencies, and the public at large. Direct notice will be given to landowners, local governments, state agencies, and anyone who has signed up for email updates on the DNR PWI update webpage. Notice of preliminary corrections will also be given to county newspapers of record, the EQB monitor, the state register, and posted to DNR's PWI update webpage. This notice will include a date, location, and time for a public meeting that will be held in each county. This notice will accompany a public comment period. The DNR team will consider all comments received as part of finalizing the corrections. Final corrections will be given in the form of a DNR order, and the PWI will then be updated. This order is a final agency decision, and as such, any person who disagrees with such a decision is entitled to judicial review at the Minnesota Court of Appeals. Our current thinking is that we will issue a final order for each county as they are completed. There are still many details of the process that are yet to be finalized. Mainly, where will we start? How will we proceed across the state? And many different details associated with making determinations on the corrections in front of us. Based on the process that we're doing to kick off this project, hiring the team, developing the review procedures, we envision that the project will begin in earnest as far as notice to counties in January of 2025. So this is what we have determined so far about the project. More will be, as we finalize the procedures, we'll be providing that information. So if you haven't already, we encourage you to sign up for updates at the PWI update webpage. We did want to thank everybody for coming today and listening to our presentation. I want to draw your attention to the webpage one more time for signing up for updates, for keeping up to date with the project. And if you want to view this presentation, or if you want to review our responses to questions that come in, those will all be posted on this webpage. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Camille to begin our question and answer period.
Excellent. Thanks, Randall. Do you want to maybe stop screen sharing? Perfect. So folks, I have a wonderful suite of questions coming in. So thank you for those who have submitted some. I think we can go ahead and get started with our first one, which is a question of, has there been a change to the definition of public waters? Is that why the PWI update is being done? Randall, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think we covered that in the presentation, but there really was no change to any of those 11 definitions of a public water. What the statute change did is it clarified that a water body's presence or absence on the PWI is not how you determine in finality something is a public water. The public water inventory is a tool that we use. It's an informational tool that we use. And essentially, as we go through this process of the updates, if there's a water body that's on the public water inventory and it doesn't meet the definition of a public water, we will remove it. If there's a water body that's not on the public water inventory, but it meets the definition of a public water, we will add it.
Excellent. Thanks, Randall. Another question we've got is, will the DNR staff be making jurisdictional decisions as requested to determine if a water body is a public water? And what does that process look like? If not the DNR, who's responsible for making this determination?
I'm thinking, when you're thinking jurisdictional, that's usually more of a waters of the U.S., which is a separate determination, which is different than the state determination of public waters. So I just want to make that clarification, because what directs the state isn't the U.S. jurisdictional waters. It is separate, and it is determined by that statutory definition that we showed, those 11 different characteristics of basins, watercourses, and wetlands that are public waters based on meeting that definition.
Thanks, Randall. Melissa, anything to add on that one? Okay.
Nope.
Great. Another question we have is, what about drainage being a societal benefit of public watercourses? Is it not?
Well, you certainly, there are watercourses that meet the definition of public water. However, they are part of public drainage systems, and there's a separate statutory statute that indicates how those waters are regulated and how they are considered, with respect that they kind of have two purposes. One is the public water, but they also are serving as part of a public drainage system. And so there is a very close relationship between those two. In the historic PWI, those water courses were indicated as what we call the heavy dashed line. And it indicated that while it meets the statutory definition, it is being managed under a public drainage system.
All right, thanks, Randall. Another question we have is, are all judicial ditches with running water considered as possible additions to the PWI?
Not all, no. As I said, if you're part of a judicial system, so you're part of a drainage system, then, you could be an altered natural water course, right? And so that would meet the definition. But again, the relationship with this other statute for drainage as part of a public drainage system, that becomes managed under that public drainage systems. We didn't envision that we're going to make a lot of corrections to the public drainage systems. I suppose if some of those come in as part of the process, we could consider those. But really, we're looking at those areas outside of the public drainage systems that meet the definition of public waters.
Thanks, Randall. Another question we have from one of our participants is, are tribes considered landowners, stakeholders, or the public? We were not mentioned in the introduction.
Well, I would say that you're definitely not a stakeholder. Tribes are much greater than a stakeholder. Obviously, you're a sovereign nation within the state, that we would have the same notification and coordination, and if requested, consultation on those corrections that would be within or affecting tribal reservations.
All right. Thanks, Randall. We have a question from an attendee that asks, where can we find the measurement for the area of a class 3, 4, or 5 wetland?
Are you talking maybe the only measurement for wetlands is the size. The type 3, 4, or 5 are the characteristics that the wetlands have. They classify different wetlands for different classification systems, and the classification system that the statute uses is actually an older one. But yeah, so the type 3, it is, can have water standing in it, but can also, as the season progresses, not be as waterlogged. Type 4s, as I said, are really shallow marshes with water depths anywhere between 6 inches and 3 feet. And then lastly, type 5 are these ponds, these shallow ponds, less than 6 feet of water, fringed with emergent vegetation. So those are the characteristics that type 3, 4, and 5 have. The size is just how big it is. So what's the delineation of those wetlands? If you look at that delineation around one of those wetlands, if it's out in the county in an unincorporated area and it's greater than 10 square miles, it's a public water. If it's less, it's not a public water. If you're in an incorporated city or town, then the measurement is 2.5 acres. If that delineation is 2.5 acres or greater, then it's a public water. If it's less than that, then it's not a public water.
And so, Randall, where can folks find the language that you're quoting? Is that the statutory language?
Yeah. Want me to pull that screen up again real quick?
Yeah, that might be helpful. And then we'll also have this recording online so that you can, so that folks can refer to it after today's conversation. And I think maybe if we can just bring it up and demonstrate the statutory language, that might be helpful.
Can you see my screen okay, Camille?
Yes. Yep.
So yeah, so the statutory definition is in 103G.005 subdivision 15A. And this is directly out of that statute definition. And as I pointed out, and this is important to note, is that also in the definitions in a different subdivision, they define what water courses are and they define what water basins are. So it's really a dual part you need to look at. The water courses requires a definable bed and banks, and the water basins it's essentially it's a natural depression capable of holding water that's visible from an aerial photograph. And so they have to have those characteristics combined with these characteristics to become a public water.
Thanks, Randall.
And I just dropped a link in the chat with that to that statutory definition. I know it might be hard for some folks to see everything on that screen, but this is all in statute. So I put the link to that statutory language.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. And I want to acknowledge that folks are doing a great job of submitting questions, but if you're interested in submitting one and need a reminder on how to navigate there, just to the left of the button that you click at the bottom with the X that you use to get out of this call, there's an ellipses or 3 dots horizontally, more options, and you can, or I'm sorry, it's actually all the way to the bottom right, and it's the 3 dots there. Yes, thank you. And you select the Q&A. Thank you to Randall for sharing that.
And I just want to also add a reminder that you had said in the beginning, Camille, but I mean, there look to be a lot of questions that have come in. And so I just reminder to folks that we are collecting all of these. And even if we don't, if we run out of time today to speak to all of them, we will get to them and share that information on our webpage.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. All right. So another question from the participants. We have Bowser, or the Board of Water and Soil Resources, wants to abandon wetland types and deleted type references in the WCA. Does this have any implication for the wetland typing references in the Public Waters statute, or do you see the DNR having an interest in changing the wetland type references?
It's good. Well, the first part of that, it shouldn't have any effect. I mean, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Circular 39 that we use for the types is clear, and so we can still make those determinations. Is there any interest in changing that? I guess we hadn't considered that, to tell you the truth. It would be nice to be consistent across state agencies for those, but we haven't had any conversations of that as of yet.
Thank you. Another question we've got is, I assume the answer is yes, but will the DOW numbers currently used to uniquely identify public waters be adjusted as a result of this process, e.g. if a new lake is added or if a lake is removed?
Good question. I hadn't envisioned that we would adjust in whole. I mean, if one is removed, then that number would probably just be retired. And if one is added, we would start up at the next one. I hadn't envisioned that we would go through and adjust, because they're numerical in each county, right? And so I hadn't envisioned that we would adjust the numbers. But, a tangentially related topic to that, as we make these corrections, we are updating those digital data files that we have for public waters. And so we will be making, not holistically, but for the waters that we're looking at, we will be making corrections to the geometry of that digital data and the attributes of the data. So that'll be a great resource for folks to have those attributes updated as we move forward.
And this is a connected question, Randall. A participant asks, or put forward, also many, I would guess greater than 50% of water bodies that have a DOW number currently have no official name. In databases, they are simply called quote unquote unnamed, which is a bit confusing. Will there be any effort to name unnamed lakes or associate maybe local or colloquial names with these water bodies?
We've had a brief conversation about this internally, and there is a very formal process for naming of geologic features, essentially, and waters being one of them. We did not include the scope in the scope of our update. We did not include that naming convention, updating all that naming convention. We will probably just stick with the unnamed watercourse as part of our going forward. There is there's a separate process for designating the names of those, which really isn't part of our proposal.
Thank you. And another question is, how are counties being scheduled for these reviews? Are ag-heavy regions being prioritized?
That's part that we haven't gotten to yet. And definitely I hadn't envisioned, no one has mentioned prioritization of agricultural areas. Given that we are just starting out, we're probably going to try to pick some ones that might be a little easier for us to work through as a team. But we haven't come to any determinations on who goes first and at what, are we going to start at one end of the state and move forward, or are we going to start in the four corners and move in? We haven't decided that. One of the things that we've been discussing is, so you've got a county you're working in, and then you've got a lake that's on the border that goes over to the next county, or you got a water course that goes over to the next county. Those could be problematic if we finalize a correction in one and we haven't gotten to the correction of the other. That would be very disjointed. And so we might need to make some decisions around either adjacent counties or portions of basins and watercourses that are adjacent to a county to kind of include those in the correction process, just so that we don't have this disconnected inventory, as you know, because it's an 8-year project, and so we wouldn't want to have discontinuous determinations on the same water body for any length of time. So that is something that we're considering. I don't know, if people want to make suggestions, if there's any counties that want to go first, we can certainly take those, but we haven't made those determinations yet.
All right. Another question we have is, how are you dealing with drained or altered basins? The earlier slide said they remain PWI, so will they be restored?
Well, that's a detail. I mean, if it meets the definition, it will be there. And so, you know, obviously the definition precluded meandered lakes that have been legally drained, so those wouldn't be back. If there's ones that have been drained, I mean, we certainly don't see this as a big part of the project, but certainly there are many different situations that will be tricky to deal with, such as what's been identified, and there's others too. And as part of our development of the process, we are putting together a technical manual that the team will use, and we've identified all of these areas, and so we're going to work through those different difficult areas and have a solid procedure that'll be consistent statewide on how we handle those difficult situations. And that's in the works right now.
All right, thanks, Randall. A question we have is, will subject landowners receive notice of field visits? Will landowners have an opportunity to speak directly with hydrologists? Will they have a chance to hire their own consultants? Aside from the chance to comment, will landowners get any chance to directly present their evidence and position before the agency adopts its order?
Definitely, if a site visit is going to be doing, you'd be noticed, right? Without question. Well, you know, the purpose of the public meeting is really to have that conversation, right? That, you know, the hydrologists and likely myself will be at these public meetings. We certainly will have opportunities for conversations prior to the official public meeting. And as part of the public meeting, that's the opportunity to bring forward any information that you want. And you can even do it after that too. That's not the only opportunity, but it is within that comment period. So if someone feels that they want to, you know, based on the map, the preliminary corrections map, if they feel they need to hire a consultant to get a second opinion and to bring that information forward, yes, that's definitely what we're envisioning as part of the process.
Thanks, Randall. Another question we've got is, what makes a county easier to evaluate if it is completely based
less corrections? Less corrections. So Rock County, no. Yeah, that's probably something we need to evaluate, right? Yeah, because really, I think, you know, you look at some of these counties that just have extensive you know, water resources and public water resources, and those obviously are more challenging just because of the sheer numbers. You know, areas that have the, you know, a lot of those intermingling with public drainage systems, those make it more challenging. So you know, I don't know what makes it easier, but I do know what makes it more challenging. That's part of it.
Thanks, Randall. Once the PWI update is complete, Will that final product be the tool to identify if a channel is a public water, or will there be a requirement to ask state staff if a channel is public waters, even if it is not shown on the PWI?
Well, the PWI, again, is the tool that we would use, and that will be the first and foremost tool that everybody should use. It's the tool that people have used for the last 40 years, and it will continue to be that tool moving forward. But there still could be situations where, for whatever reason, a water body that meets the definition, it didn't make it onto the inventory. And in those situations, and they would be rare, especially they should be super rare, maybe even non-existent, hopefully, after we're done with the update project. But there could be situations where that comes into play.
Excellent. Thank you. Will watersheds be given advance notice of reviews done within their boundaries? Will they be given the chance to have meaningful input to propose changes aside from the opportunity to comment?
Yeah, we envision, I call it a scoping period, and that's because of my environmental review background, but it's really before we even start working in a county, we'll be giving notifications to, watershed districts, counties, other local governments, cities, the public as a whole, to help let them know that, hey, we're moving into your county. Here's an opportunity for you to give us any information about corrections that might be needed. Because I'm sure that there are many people out there that have areas that they think, this doesn't quite look right on the PWI. We should get that corrected. And so we do have that effort. And that's before we even do any analysis of correction. So that's right at the very beginning.
Excellent. Will DNR utilize various high-definition satellite imaging and AI that can identify open water, aquatic vegetation, and other physical characteristics, such as bank or even OHW?
Well, we hadn't envisioned AI. We do envision using the best available LiDAR and aerial photography that we have available as part of it. And I know that we also have some other tools around the NWI wetlands that we will utilize, and we have some LiDAR-derived products on hydrography that we will envision using. So we do intend to use the best available desktop tools we can to identify potential corrections.
Okay, great. Will newly identified PWI be subject to the Minnesota buffer law? If so, when?
Well, yeah, and I think Melissa touched on this, if there's a water body that was not formally on the PWI and it's added, and that's actually a unique thing about the buffer law. The buffer law does point to the buffer map or the PWI as what determines what sort of buffer is needed. And so a buffer would be needed. When ongoing conversations with Bowser on how that would happen, I envision there would be plenty of notice before that buffer map is updated, and the need for compliance with the buffer law would come into place, but there would eventually need to be a buffer established.
Okay. Who should we contact to confirm a water body's presence or absence on the PWI? In our business, we are often contacting the DNR Aquatic Plant Management Specialist. Should we be contacting the Division of Ecological and Water Resources, the counties?
Your best contact is the area hydrologist. They are within Division of Ecological and Water Resources. Each area hydrologist has a fair couple of counties that they work in. If you go to the DNR website and search under ecological waters and look under like water permitting, I think is what it is, and we do have a map of the counties and the different area hydrologists and which counties they cover. That's going to be your number one. They are so familiar with the public waters within their areas that'll be your best bet for sure. Area hydrologists are the backbone of DNR waters.
Thanks, Randall. We have a question which is, will new and updated maps be able to be printed for the counties like we currently have? Will we have a final product to reference?
Most definitely. Most definitely. I mean, everything's so digital now, but yeah, we will definitely make those maps available and published so that people can access those without having to have a GIS expertise as part of your entity.
And then I think, Randall, you spoke to this, but just to make sure, there's a question that asks, will there be an effort to make sure the PWI alignments will match across county lines before finalizing the information by county?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. We, like I say, we haven't finalized how we want to do that, but definitely that's one of the issues we're working through as we finalize our procedure, because that just seems awkward and probably inefficient, to have a nice determination on one county and then just the next property over not. So the current thinking, and this is subject to change because it's just our initial thoughts, is that as we look at a county, and if we see we're doing a correction on something that crosses, we'll kind of just scoop that watershed or that basin into the and provide notice to that county, provide notice to those landowners, provide notice to those entities, just so that they can all be included, so we can finalize that one. Whether we end up with that at the end, I'm not sure, but that's current thinking. We debated whether we should do it across watersheds rather than by county, and I think that we're going to stick with the county by county to the degree we can.
Right. Back to the question, or connected to the previous question, two questions ago, I guess. We've got a question that asks, will this be a living map going forward, or once again, a relatively static document once the update is completed?
Well, we do have, the DNR does have the authority to make corrections to the map, so it can change. I envision, my hope is that there will be hardly any need for any changes after we get done with this 8-year project. So hopefully it will be durable, but it can change. If something happens, we have cases where maybe there's a reservoir, and maybe the dam fails, and then the dam doesn't get replaced, and so now we have the water course, and so we no longer have a basin in there. Those kind of corrections could happen. We can have situations where we reclassify a public water wetland to either a basin or classify it as not a public water, but something that would be regulated under the Wetland Conservation Act. And those kind of changes we can do, as requests come in, as petitions come in. And so it can change. But I do envision, and I hope that once we get done with the 8-year project, it'll be pretty stable.
All right. Another related question is, prior to the 2024 session, law directing the DNR to update the PWI, had the agency made past corrections to the PWI?
Yes, we have. The most common was when we get a petition about a public water wetland not meeting the definition, and we go look, and sometimes we say, oh yeah, you're right, that's not really a type 3, that's a type 2 wetland, and so we would remove it from the inventory. Not common, but it has happened.
And we had, prior to the 2024 session gave very directed language for the DNR to go forth with this broad update. But prior to that, though, there is already language in statute that allows the DNR to make updates, to make corrections to the PWI as appropriate.
All right, thank you. One of our participants asks, can you talk a little bit more about whether constructed water bodies can be included in the PWI, such as a stormwater pond?
Stormwater ponds typically are not. If you look at the definition of a basin, it's a natural depression capable of holding water. Construction stormwater in an upland area wouldn't meet that definition. And so I can't imagine that would be the case. I'm trying to think of a situation of where that might be the case. I can imagine maybe if your stormwater was a big wetland complex if you chose to develop a big wetland complex more than 2.5 acres in an incorporated area that would meet the definition, then that could conceivably be a public water. Just thinking in the abstract though.
All right. We're closing in on our last few minutes. I think we maybe have time for one more question, which is, over the next 8 years, will PWI GIS data be updated piecemeal as counties complete, or will you be rolling out a finished product at the end of the project?
Well, our current thinking is that we will finalize as we move forward. And so we won't wait until the very end. But at the end, we will have the complete project. But we did envision completing counties as we proceeded throughout the state. And so it will get updated. We'll update the PWI data layer when we complete an area.
Okay. And
Current thinking anyways.
Yeah. Randall, one more question, since we've got a couple more minutes. Are the changes to the PWI only additions, or will some public waters be removed as well in the process?
Yeah, some very well could be removed. As I said, if it's on the inventory, but it doesn't meet the statutory definition, it'll definitely be removed. While it's not the scope of our project, if we got a request to reclassify public water wetlands to WACA wetlands from a local unit of government, we could certainly consider that as well.
All right. Well, I know that I think we made a pretty significant dent in the topics that folks expressed interest in getting more information on, but as a reminder, we will be creating a document or a product from that responds to the questions that we haven't had an opportunity to answer this afternoon, and we will post that along with the recording to today's call. So I want to thank everyone for taking time to join us for today's discussion. We look forward to sharing more information with you as this process progresses. And we certainly invite you to sign up for that Gov Delivery list, email list. And you can find the sign up information at mndnr.gov/PWI update. If you have any other needs that are not met by the information there and the products from coming out of today's conversation, staff can be reached at the project email address, which is pwi.update.dnr@state.mn.us. And we appreciate your time and hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks for spending some of it with us.